The Canon R7 is weird. It might be the perfect camera for you, but it is super weird. So what makes this intermediate level camera so strange, and is it worth the price for you? I know you're not supposed to judge a book by its cover, but the first unusual thing about the R7 is its body. On first glance, it's very ergonomically similar to other Canon bodies like the R6, and I enjoy this design a lot. I think it's comfortable, it fits in my hand well, but there's a couple of manual controls and dials that are unique to the R7. First, you have a dedicated focus mode switch down beneath the lens mount. This kind of seems like a super odd addition. I mean, why would you add a dedicated focus switch to the body when your lenses already have one built in? This would indeed be weird, except there's a reason for it, and that being that the R7 was launched alongside a bunch of RF lenses from Canon, none of which, to my knowledge, have a dedicated focus mode switch built into the lens. So Canon has put that on the R7's body. Is it unusual? Yes. Is it useful? Yes, but still kind of weird that the lenses just don't have it. The rest of the body does feel kind of cheap to me, and I was trying to figure out why. I think it's because they switched out the typical control dial that encircles the set button and replaced it with just a normal D-pad, and then moved that control dial up around the joystick at the top, which is it's just weird. I'm not a fan of this placement at all, because when I was trying to use the joystick to adjust my autofocus zones and stuff like that, I just found myself constantly bumping the control dial, and when I was trying to use the control dial, I found myself bumping the joystick. It doesn't ruin the entire camera for me by any means, but it's just weird. So overall, the buttons and the switches and the dials, they all kind of have a bit of a cheap plasticky feel to them. I don't think it's as bad as they're gonna break or anything like that on you. It just doesn't make it feel like a super professional camera body, which is a shame. The next thing that's kind of weird about the R7 is that it has a 32.5 megapixel APS-C sensor. This sensor actually takes less processing power, which means, among other things, the camera can shoot higher burst rates in photo mode without overheating or having to buffer. The R7 can fire up to 30 frame per second bursts with the electronic shutter and 15 frame per second bursts with the mechanical shutter. This makes it awesome for stuff like sports and animal photography. Those faster firing rates within such a small body at such a low price have something to do with the APS-C sensor, but there are also some downsides to this sensor which you need to be aware of. The first and most obvious one is that it will crop your effective focal length on all of your lenses by 1.6 times. Basically, it's gonna zoom in on all of your lenses, which some photographers like because it gives them a little bit more reach, but it's a detriment to others because getting an angle at 15 millimeters or 16 millimeters is practically impossible with an APS-C sensor, unless you're gonna go way down into like an ultra-wide fisheye lens, which most people don't have. I love landscape photography, but my 15 millimeter lens is effectively only a 24 millimeter lens on this camera, which just isn't quite wide enough for my liking, and it's a big bummer. Of course, this crop does also carry over into the video modes on the camera, so anybody who's looking to get that wide angle vlog view is not gonna be able to achieve that with the R7. At least not with any typical vlogging zoom lens. One thing that's not cropped though is the amount of amazing creative assets you can get on today's video sponsor, Motion Array. Motion Array is a website where I source video templates, motion graphics, footage, music, and more to level up the production quality of my videos. Most recently, they released an AI voice generator tool. This thing's awesome. It will take any text you give it, absolutely anything at all, and produce an amazing, realistic sounding voiceover within seconds, all using AI. You can choose from dozens of different voices to find the one that matches the vibe of your video, and even adjust the speed and emotion of the audio clip. Motion Array doesn't stop here though. They also have special effect plugins that integrate directly into your video editing software so that you can drag and drop effects right onto your footage within the same application. The best part is all of these assets are cleared for online use for your own personal channels and any client productions, so you never have to worry about copyright strikes again. Check it out. I have a link down in the description below. Thank you, Motion Array, for sponsoring this video. The R7 shoots 4K video, and that's downsampled from the 7K sensor within the camera, which means that it's a very sharp 4K. The 1.6 times crop of the APS-C sensor isn't exactly the biggest problem for filmmakers. It'll give you a different look than full frame, and it'll make it harder to achieve really low depth of field shots like this one right here, but a lot of filmmakers, they don't really mind that, and we've been shooting 1.6 times APS-C film for a while. Where the crop does become a real problem though is when you're shooting in 4K 60 frames per second. There's two options here for the R7. You can shoot in a uncropped 4K 60 line skipping mode, or you can film in a cropped 4K 60 fine mode. In this fine shooting mode, the R7 subsamples the sensor, which means it is using effectively 1/4 of that sensor to give you your image. This results in an additional 1.8 times crop on top of the pre-existing 1.6 times focal length crop of the sensor. That's a big deal, like that's a lot. For example, in the 4K fine mode with that extra crop, a 15mm lens goes from an effective 24mm focal length on the APS-C sensor all the way up to a 51mm focal length. That's tough. So the question is, why wouldn't you always film in the R7's uncropped 4K mode? Well, because this actually produces a noticeably less sharp image than the cropped mode. I can't pretend to understand the science of this enough to convey it to you, but the difference is undeniable, and it's just another weird thing about the R7. So when filming in the super cropped 4K 60 FPS fine mode, just keep in mind that if you're trying to shoot an event and get some slow motion, you're basically stuck at an effective 50mm focal length and beyond. It looks good, but it is really punched in. The subsampling that makes the cropped 60 FPS sharper also produces a pretty negative effect on low light performance because the camera is effectively, again, only using 1/4 of the sensor to capture light. So the less of the sensor you're using, the less light it can capture, which results in more digital noise in your video. I ran into a pretty bad amount of noise with the R7 and 60 FPS crop while only pushing the ISO to 6400. Other than that, it's a pretty solid video option because it doesn't overheat, at least not in any normal circumstances. It shoots C-Log 3, and there's no baked-in recording limit. So I just think that it's kind of a weird camera. So who is the Canon R7 even for? I think it's a pretty solid camera, and it's certainly Canon's most impressive mirrorless crop sensor body to date. So if you're a photographer who likes the crop, this is sort of your best option right now. I think the only thing that you might not really like about it is those weird little body quirks with the dials and everything. That said, I'm hearing rumors that Canon's gonna be releasing a more professional, higher power camera with an APS-C sensor in the coming year, so you might just kind of want to hold off and wait and see what they're doing there. I don't really know. On the video side, the question is a little bit more complicated. I wouldn't really ever recommend this to anyone trying to do online content creation because that APS-C crop is gonna ruin the wide angle vlog look that most people go for when it comes to internet content. That said, this would be a pretty solid option for any wedding videographers who don't mind the crop because it doesn't have any sort of the overheating issues that plagued the original R5, the R6, and the R8. Currently, B&H has this on sale new for $1,300, but you can usually find it for around $1,000 if you look in the right places or you don't mind buying used. That said, if you've got a little bit of headroom in your budget, I would recommend saving up and buying the Canon R6 Mark II instead because it'll give you a full frame sensor, faster photo bursts, better 4K 60 modes, and a more professional body. Alternatively, if you don't mind the limits of the R7, but you really just want a full frame camera within the same sort of budget and within Canon's ecosystem, you should check out this video over here where I review the Canon R8, which might just be the perfect camera for your needs.